all of you have been invited at the instance of PUCL Maharashtra, which is hosting this meeting. Yeah.
Since I am as I said, a Katha Vachak and not a Pandit, I want to tell a few more stories because they relate to the stories that relate to Bombay. I want to tell you. We happen to be sitting in a hall that is named after, I believe, Lady Willingdon. That's part of the address that was sent to me. That I thought should be provocation enough for me to tell you this story. That there were references to Maneckji Dadabhoy. Why there was a reference to him is he was the first legislator in the country to have broken India's silence in its parliament on untouchability. Before that, I mean, there were very eminent legislators like, say, Gokhale. He passed away in 1915, shortly after Gandhi returned. Yet, for the 10-15 years that he was there, and he set new benchmarks for how a legislator should be performing due diligence, and put the British administration on the mat on issues like budget and so on. Despite all that accomplishments of his, he somehow never raised this issue of untouchability in the legislature. And that, the person to who goes the credit of breaking the silence on that subject was not any Congress member at all. It was not even, he was not even a Hindu. He was a Parsi, a little known Parsi. So little known that he was mistaken for Dadabhoy Naoroji, who actually took the view that social reforms should not be discussed in the Congress because they are a divisive issue. So following that line, Congress legislators also kept away from it on the legislative front. So since he was not a congressman, he broke the silence on that subject, and there was such a pushback from Congress leaders of the time, and they were the ones, a section of Congress constituted the Hindu right of the time. The Hindu right that we are familiar with today was yet to be born. RSS came into existence only in 1925. Hindu Mahasabha in 1916 was still a very nascent body. It was still very provincial. And it was the likes of Madan Mohan Malviya, Surendranath Banerjee, who were at different times presidents of Congress party. They were the ones who viciously attacked this man, accused him of hurting their religious feelings by daring to talk about untouchability. These people actually say on record, that was what was so fascinating to me as a journalist, to see that here is this great man, or who we consider to be great, who was conferred Bharat Ratna within months of Modi coming to power, right? The founder of Banaras Hindu University. So what does he say in what was called Imperial Legislative Council at the time? He would say that this is something very deeply offensive. You are hurting our religious feelings. So this man says in his defense that, look, I am somebody who's been waiting all these years for you to raise this issue. But since none of you from that community raised the issue, I couldn't wait any longer, because at the end of the day, I also represent Hindus. I come from a constituency which is predominantly Hindu. So what if I am a Parsi? Somebody had to break the silence on this subject. And you cannot take the position that untouchability is not worth discussing in Parliament or Imperial Legislative Council. This was the brazen position that people like Madan Mohan Malviya took, right? Surendranath Banerjee and he were the twin forces opposing this, right? So what the government does as a result is, okay, please don't insist on this resolution of yours being adopted or being put to vote. Please withdraw it. We will act on the substance of it. That's the assurance that the British government gives to Dadabhoy, and true to that promise, they start collecting data, because that's what Dadabhoy in his resolution says, that here is this section of people who face very peculiar disabilities. Look at the farsightedness of this man. It's something that if you read today in 2023, you will say, what's the big deal? Isn't that self-evident? But the fact is in 1916, nobody saw it that way. None of the great people of Congress saw it that way. None of the great Hindu leaders saw it that way. On the contrary, they were on record saying, how is untouchability a subject of discussion before a legislature? What on earth does it have to do with legislature? This was a position they took, right? So he says, no, they have peculiar problems. They need to be studied as a class apart. You need to take special measures to, the word he uses is ameliorate, for the amelioration of what they at that time were called depressed classes, right? So as a result, all the provinces were told by the central government of the time to to start collecting data. And Madras was the one that was ahead of other states. They set up for the first time a body called Protector of Depressed Classes, which is the first ever official body recognizing the need to deal specially with the depressed classes, with the most vulnerable, the most oppressed section of our society. And today, it has taken different forms over the years, Ministry of Social Welfare. Today it's called Ministry of Social Empowerment. There's a constitutional body, Commission of Scheduled Caste, Commission of Scheduled Tribes, right? This was where it all began. And then they don't stop with that. Madras government under Willingdon, that's where it comes in. This is Lady Willingdon. Because what happened was, before he became governor of Madras, he was governor of Bombay. And then after he becomes governor of, after his tenure as governor of Madras, he then goes on to become Governor General of Canada, and then he comes back to India and becomes Viceroy of India. So he has a very distinguished career. Now, one of the most important things that he did, and among my unsung heroes, is not just somebody like Dadabhoy Maneckji Dadabhoy for breaking the silence on untouchability, but it is also a British administrator like Willingdon. Why? What does he do? In 1919, remember, 1916, this man breaks the silence. He shames Congress party into passing a resolution on untouchability for the first time in its history in 1917. A year after he breaks the silence in the legislature, they finally say, okay, this is becoming morally untenable, so let's pass a resolution, right? In 1917 they pass. But they are still far from raising any demands to, for any special measures to ameliorate their lot. Much less do they say they need representation in the government, they need representation in the legislature. Representation is the objective of what he referred to as reservations, right? So now this man, Willingdon in Madras, he nominates, he recognizes the fact that in no constituency are they enough in numbers, do they have resources to vote or to vote on their own strength and come to get elected. So he recognizes that the only way these depressed classes can ever have representation in the legislature was through the route of nomination. And for the first time ever, he nominates a Dalit to the Madras Legislative Council, and that was the first in our country. And this was at a time when Congress does not make any such demand. It was far from its contemplation. And such a demand was not even made by Justice Party, which was overtly a social justice party, but it was a party essentially of the upper non-Brahmins. So their concern hadn't till then come down to the depressed classes. So this is a measure that Willingdon takes on his own, and he nominates MC Rajah. So this is a watershed moment in our history. This is a revolutionary step. Why? Because suddenly, remember, I said Madras was not just a place of untouchability, it was unapproachability. So a member of such a despised community is suddenly, through a very far-sighted, very radical measure taken by a British governor, very quietly, very subversively, he brings him in and makes him sit at that high table. So suddenly these caste Hindus will have to address this man, because that was a protocol that they could not get away from. They have to address him as Honorable Member MC Rajah. I mean, if you look at it with a degree of empathy, you will understand how revolutionary it was, right? And then post, this was something in anticipation of the Government of India Act of 1919, Montagu-Chelmsford reforms, and later they do have provisions, I mean, for non-Brahmins in Madras and in Bombay. Some reservations were introduced, and they retain the initiative that Willingdon made of nominating. Becomes part of the Government of India Act, So now, as a result of such measures that were taken in Madras, comes another revolutionary step. In 1926, the first ever legislation against untouchability is passed anywhere in the country. And who piloted it? Who was instrumental in passing that legislation? It was again a Dalit legislator. I mean, you would think that this is a moment in our history which we would all be, or which we ought to be aware of, and which we should be celebrating as a big turning point in our history, right? I mean, here's a community that can't even be part of the governance structure, that their presence itself would be polluting. Through the reforms that the British government made, some of them get access to it, and some of them get nominated to it, and they are not some token representatives. Some of the best of them were brought there. MC Rajah was one such, who was the first one, and the one I'm referring to now is R. Veerian. When I mentioned this at the book event that was held a few months ago in Madras, it came as news to the gathering there. In fact, some of the best known experts on caste in Madras, V. Geeta, Ravi Kumar, who's a legislator, who was an MP from a Dalit party, Justice Chandru, then Vidudalai Rajendran, who's a representative of Periyar's school of thought. Speaker after speaker was saying, look, we are all people who have worked at the grassroots level on this issue of caste, but we were not aware of this Veerian's historic contribution, that he pulled off this kind of a legislation. Getting to raise questions is one thing, getting to get a resolution passed is another thing. But actually managing to pull off a law, that's the highest a legislator can do. And he was a private member. So imagine the odds he overcame, the kind of mobilization he made, and the kind of backing he got from the British government of the time to take what was admittedly a baby step. It was not a huge thing, but it was revolutionary because it was the first ever legislation on untouchability. So you have such unsung heroes whose stories are here. So this is the value of storytelling. As I said, stories also have their own value, and sometimes they might jolt you out of whatever notions you might have developed on account of the existing theories on the subject, but these might force you to rethink, these might force you to look afresh at whatever is the existing understanding or the existing literature in the subject. So thank you.